Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will be covering the fundamentals of training to improve speed. First, we need to establish what exactly we mean by speed. Essentially, we are referring to sprinting with maximal effort in a straight line from one point to another. This could be any distance from only 5 meters up to 100 meters. When an athlete performs a maximal effort sprint, there are two semi-distinct phases. First, we have the acceleration portion of the sprint, then the maximal velocity phase. These two phases are not strictly independent from each other, they exist on a spectrum from the start of a sprint to the end. The acceleration portion refers to the first step of the sprint up until the athlete reaches maximal velocity. It usually takes around 30 to 60 meters to reach maximal velocity, depending on the athlete. So from the first step to maximal velocity, there is a gradual shift in sprint mechanics as the athlete runs faster and faster. During the initial portion of a sprint, the athlete involves longer ground contact times and primarily uses concentric muscle actions to propel themselves forward. Therefore, early acceleration is more reliant on force production and power output. As the athlete reaches faster speeds, ground contact times are shorter and the joints are almost at full extension during ground contact. Therefore, maximal velocity sprinting is more reliant on joint stiffness and the stretch shortening cycle efficiency. So how can we improve sprint performance? We will now cover the most effective training methods that can enhance speed development. The first and most important training method for speed development is unloaded sprinting. This refers to classic sprinting in a straight line with no external resistance. This is the most specific training method for speed development and must be performed to achieve any improvements in performance. Unloaded sprinting should always use maximal effort with every sprint. This requires full recovery between sprints to ensure that maximal intent can be applied into every single rep. Speed is extremely fatigue sensitive, which means that even small levels of fatigue will inhibit sprint performance. So a general rule is to allow 1 minute of recovery for every 10 meters ran. The distance used for sprinting should reflect the quality that you are trying to emphasize. For acceleration development, shorter distances should be used, while longer distances are required for maximal velocity development. The next method of training to improve sprint performance is resisted sprinting. This refers to sprinting against some form of external resistance. Resisted sprinting overloads the force requirements of sprinting. This generally has the highest transfer to acceleration performance as it replicates the force demands of acceleration sprinting. Resisted sprints should always use maximal effort, just like unloaded sprints. Distances used should be fairly short, as we want this form of training to transfer to acceleration performance. Distances of around 10 to 30 meters are a good general guide for resisted sprinting. The load used can be adjusted based on what quality is being emphasized. Heavier loads will demand higher force output and involve slower running speeds. This is best to build sprint-specific strength, which can build a baseline foundation of force production qualities. Lighter loads are more specific to sprinting and are best for maximum transfer to sprint performance. There are many exercises that can be used for resisted sprints, such as hill sprints, parachute sprints, sled pushes, sled pulls, and more. However, I think that the sled pull is best for most athletes, as it is fairly inexpensive and can allow the load to be adjusted based on what quality the athlete is trying to emphasize. The next training method that can enhance sprint performance is plyometric training. This refers to exercises with short ground contact times that have a high reliance on the stretch shortening cycle. Plyometric training can make athletes more efficient at using the stretch shortening cycle. This generally has the highest transfer to maximum velocity performance, as this is where ground contact times are shortest, and the stretch shortening cycle has the highest involvement. Plyometrics should use exercises which have short ground contact times, such as drop jumps, bounds, and hurdle jumps. The goal with plyometric training should be to minimize contact time on the ground while maximizing jump height. The next training method that can enhance sprint performance is power training. Power training refers to using ballistic exercises with external load. Ballistic exercises are those which involve complete acceleration through the entire movement, such as jumping and throwing. Power training replicates the muscle actions seen during sprinting, particularly those during the acceleration portion of the sprint. Power training should involve maximal intent with every rep. The load used can be altered to change the emphasis of power training. Heavier loads will emphasize force production, while lighter loads will emphasize velocity. The next method of training that can enhance sprint performance is maximal strength training. Maximal strength refers to lifting to improve absolute force production. This can benefit sprint performance by raising the absolute amount of force that can be produced. This will also improve the relative amount of force that can be produced in short time frames. Maximal strength training should use classic compound lifts such as the squat and deadlift variations. These exercises involve multiple muscles and joints working simultaneously to allow heavy loads to be lifted. Maximal strength training should use lower rep ranges with heavy loads. A good general recommendation is to lift in the 1 to 6 rep range with relevant loads. And the last primary training method that can enhance sprint performance is isometric strength training. Isometric strength training refers to holding sprint-specific positions against maximal loads without moving. Isometric strength training for the ankle, knee, and hip can enhance the ability to resist movement and maintain rigid joints during ground contact. This will generally have the highest transfer to maximal velocity sprinting, as this is where we want the athletes to maintain high stiffness. Isometric strength training can be performed by pushing maximally against an immovable object for around 3 to 10 seconds. This should be conducted at sprint-specific joint angles for maximum transfer. So the hips should be at near full extension, the knees at near full extension, and the ankles in slight plantar flexion. Now that we've established what training methods can be beneficial for sprint performance, let's now explore how this can be incorporated into a training program. Let's say for this example, we have 4 days of training, 2 sessions are on the track or an open field, and 2 sessions are at the gym. The track sessions will include unloaded sprints, resisted sprints, and plyometric training, while the gym sessions will involve power training, maximal strength, and isometric strength training. Let's now create an example program. As we can see here, the unloaded sprints use a distance of 50 meters on day 1 and 20 meters on day 3. This will emphasize max velocity sprinting on day 1 and acceleration on day 3. Resisted sprints use sled pulls as an exercise on both days, with day 1 using a lighter load and day 3 using a heavier load. This will allow faster speeds on day 1 and higher forces on day 3 to pair up with the unloaded sprinting. And for plyometric exercises, bounds have been chosen with no load on day 1 and additional weight vest of 5 kilos on day 3. This again pairs up with the emphasis of each day. For the gym sessions, we can see here that the trap bar jump has been implemented as a power exercise. On day 2, the load used is lighter to emphasize movement velocity, and day 4 uses a heavier load to emphasize force output. The back squat has been chosen as a strength exercise with a higher rep range on day 2 and a lower rep range on day 4. This will involve lighter loads to be lifted on day 2 and heavier loads on day 4 to pair up with the power training. And isometric strength training uses one exercise for the hips, knees, and ankles. Day 2 uses a longer duration and therefore lighter loads, while day 4 uses a shorter duration and therefore heavier loads. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.